The Russian President Vladimir Putin there.
Analysts who say one part of the special forces unit engages the Ukrainian forces, and 3-4 other columns, they just keep moving forward. So Ukrainian forces are able to stop perhaps maybe a platoon, maybe a company, maybe a little heading straight, moving the streets virtually unchallenged. Another video that went an attack from sea at one of the Ukrainian bases. There were only 13 soldiers holding that base. They were asked to surrender. Apparently, they did, and then they were neutralized in the open.
But the Russian army is clearly thought this through very taken deeply and wargamed it, and the current effort seems to be to shock and awe. You can come in with your tanks, but given the scarce boots on the ground, can the Russian army hold off against a population that would see the Russian army as invaders? The moment it starts turning into guerrilla warfare from conventional warfare, that's when Russian body bags will start piling up. We've already seen what happened in Afghanistan, and unless you overwhelm them with such brute force, you will see losses potentially starting to scale for the Russian army as well, Gaurav.
That is what Ukrainian army personnel and veterans seem to indicate. They are saying that this area will become a Chechnya or in Afghanistan for Russia. This is what they seem to insist. But there are also those, and especially where I am in eastern part of Ukraine, their point is the Russian army will come, change the regime, demilitarize this region, and that is why demilitarization is very important, because these soldiers have trained with NATO soldiers. They've carried out the exercises where for them Russia is the enemy. They will bring the older regime which was sympathetic to Russia. They will bring a different leadership, and that leadership will raise an army which will be perhaps raised by the Russians or mentored by the Russians. So this is the hope. Remember, they've successfully done this in Crimea, they've successfully done this elsewhere, and this is a template that is now being followed in Ukraine. So will this be another Afghanistan, or will this be another Crimea? Is this a template that they're following all through? And that is what President Zelensky is warning NATO countries, that so far it's restricted to this region, but President Putin will not stop here. His warning is he wants the old Soviet Union, that big superpower back, and he will not stop just at Ukraine.
Thanks, Gaurav. We won't hold you up because we want you to be safe and get back in to a place where you're far away from that shelling which we hear behind you. Joining us for perspective on this broadcast is Nood Ng, Distinguished Fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, one of India's foremost experts on Russia. Air Marshal P.K. Barbora has been the former air attaché to Moscow. He joins us on this broadcast. Welcome, Air Marshal. We've got Michael Kugelman joining us, Senior Associate at the Woodrow Wilson Center in DC. Alexander Khebra joins us at the International Desk in Kiev, in Ukraine. I want to go across to Nood Ng first, because from what we've heard from the Russian president, he's now agreed to send a delegation for talks to Minsk, the capital of Belarus, which is where President Zelensky also suggested be talking about, given that the Russian army is now in the midst of an invasion of Ukraine.
Well, this has come after Zelensky said that he is not afraid of talks about security guarantees and Ukrainian neutrality. And Ukrainian neutrality was one of the demands that Russia had. So obviously, the moment Zelensky put that on the table, President Putin had to respond. And I guess this is the response. So whether this will necessarily result or fructify because eventually say, I got the tail end of it, that one of the purposes is to install a different and replace it with something that is a little bit more friendly. So if that is the case, then what is the purpose of talking to Zelensky?
Okay, Air Marshal P.K. Barbora joins us. The Ukrainian armed forces had air defense capabilities. They had some air force as well. It seems to have been pummeled into submission. And now is your reading of the state of play that the Russians completely dominate the airspace and the airports of Ukraine?
I can hear you again.
So my question is your sense
I
of
can hear you
the
now.
state of warfare when it comes to aerial combat in Ukraine. We were told that Ukraine had some air defense capabilities, especially given from NATO and the United States, which could put up some kind of a challenge. But given the sheer scale of the force that the Russians have unleashed, is it your understanding that the Ukrainian airspace and all airports are now virtually under the control of the Russian military?
Well, let me start by giving a small introduction to make your audience more aware of it. That in every war there are objectives, and in the objectives come a very important, very important. There's the intelligence gathering before you launch an offensive or get into a war. You will look to have a favorable air situation because the final objective of yours, after going through a few more of them, will be boots on the ground. That's the last object. Unless you have boots on the ground, I'm not saying throw boots from an aircraft onto the ground. No, sorry, you have to have boots on the ground. Like the Russians have that, we have got boots on the ground in Kiev. Now, the comparison of forces of
Order now. If you have been residing in Kuwait for at least 1 year, now you can request a free
and several thousand more in addition to the 8,500. Somewhere between 10 and 12,000 total have been put on prepare to deploy or accelerated. Some of them were already on PTDO, and we shortened that tether. For instance, in some cases from 10 to 5 days. Some of that number wasn't on heightened alert, and so we did put them on PTDO, prepare to deploy orders. It varies by unit and by capability.
About Kyiv falling to Russia. Yeah, they've made clear they believe that is a proof of science that he wants to overthrow the government there. If that happens, what does the U.S. do? What is the response and the role that the United States takes after something like that happens?
Well, I would just reiterate and Russia's progression, even as we've seen
que Kiev está em perigo, nós vimos a progressão de Rússia nos últimos meses.
advance toward Kyiv.
So was this decision to coordinate with allies meant to show unity, meant to show that
Have been sanctioned rather reflects the West's impotence. Now, over 50,000 Ukrainians have crossed into neighboring states in the past 48 hours. Many of those leaving the country include women and children. This after Ukraine's president banned men of military age from leaving Ukraine. People fleeing the country following Russia's invasion, fleeing the country by car, by train, and even by foot, as you can see. Now, earlier I spoke to correspondent Magdalena Hodovnik on the Polish border with Ukraine and asked her what she'd see today.
I have been here in Chemnish as reception point for Ukrainians created by the local government. So I've been talking to Ukrainians who just arrived to Poland, or they would actually arrived yesterday because some of them are still waiting to be picked up and then continue the journey to further to Poland to see their relatives or friends or the other countries to Germany, Italy. Indeed, we welcome today are mostly women and kids and elderly people, as men between 18 and 60 years old must stay in Ukraine because of the martial law and to defend the country in case it's needed. So
and clearly, Italy is well aware of the consequences. Also, those sanctions, going back to your questions earlier, but clearly, as Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi said, well, Italy will be acting together with the EU with regards to the next moves. Marianne?
Okay, Jolandi, thank you so much for the update from Italy. Thank you so much. Okay, we will now take a very short break, but do stay with us. A lot more to come on Euronews Tonight.
Because business is not only about acting fast, but doing
Пока.
И длится это уже дольше, чем Вторая мировая война. Кризис
по 3 дні.
территории одного члена другим членом отвоевывается Крым и попираются права людей. Ангела Меркель сказала, кто сможет сложить эти кусочки пазла вместе только общими усилиями. И, к сожалению, коллективное осуждение обратилось в коллективные действия, и поэтому возникает угроза большой войны. Что мы можем спасти из этой архитектуры безопасности? Не поздно ли говорить о том, чтобы восстанавливать ее, может быть, создавать новую? Человечество делало это дважды, и каждый раз заплатив высокую цену после каждой мировой войны. Установилась тенденция на курс на новую систему, прежде чем мы потеряем огромное количество людей и обойдемся без третьей войны. В ООН уже говорили, что
With St. Ives Blemish Care Face Wash, I'm ready to put my best face forward with blemish-free.
every inch of NATO territory, and we take those obligations seriously, both to the American people and to our
second patient at the same time.
Russia versus
South Korea during the sanctions.
The Russian president declared the war on the record. Should I play the video of your president? Ambassador, shall I do it right now? Do not interrupt me, please. Thank you. And don't ask me questions when you are speaking. Proceed with your statement. Relinquish your duties as a chair. Call Putin, call Lavrov to stop aggression. There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, Ambassador. So when I was coming here an hour ago or so, I was intending to ask the Russian ambassador to confirm on the record that the Russian troops will not start firing at Ukrainians today and go ahead with the offensive. It became useless 48 minutes ago. Because about 48 minutes ago, your president declared the war on Ukraine. So now I would like to ask the ambassador of the Russian Federation to say on the record that at this very moment, your troops do not shell and bomb Ukrainian cities. That your troops do not move in the territory of Ukraine. You have a smartphone, you can call Lavrov right now. We can make a pause.
Україна
saying it doesn't want any war, while Russia is claiming she doesn't want to intervene. Someone here is lying. This is not yet an axiom, but by far not only a hypothesis. I visited the separation line in the Donbass just a couple of days ago. In legal terms, this is line separating Ukraine and temporary occupied territory, but in real terms, this is the line separating peace and the war. The line with the kindergarten on the one hand and the shell flying into it. On the one hand, the school, and on the other hand, the shell flying into the school playground with 30 kids nearby. On the other hand,
tensions have escalated between Russia and the United Kingdom on the seas off the coast of Crimea. More than 20 Russian aircraft and 2 Coast Guard ships have been shadowing a British warship, HMS Defender, sailing some 12 miles off the coastline. Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, that was back in 2014, but this annexation has not been recognized internationally. The Russians are accusing the Royal Navy of violating their territorial waters. The British say that they are in fact in Ukrainian waters. Now, the only broadcast journalist on board HMS Defender is the BBC's defence correspondent Jonathan Beale, and he's been describing the hostile warnings from Russia as Defender's crew were preparing for a possible confrontation.
this is not a drill.
Come in, take your seats, stay away. Open it upwards.
A British warship in the Black Sea, about to make a point to Russia.
So we're straight into the thick of it. We're down to active stations now, just to bring us onto a higher state of readiness.
HMS Defender has just left the port of Odessa, and as you can see, just over there, we're already being shadowed by a Russian warship. They're soon tracking Russian military aircraft. We're also tracking them.
It is a slightly more increased threat, I say, just because we're operating outside of our normal areas.
And you're being watched by the Russians.
They can see us, we can see them.
As we get close to Crimea, the tension rises. HMS Defender is going to sail within what Russia now claims is its territorial waters, but following a legally recognized shipping lane. You say there's a flashpoint potentially here in terms of how the Russians will behave.
There's a contentious point. Their posture will likely be more belligerent because of our proximity to what they recognise as their waters.
I mean, they will view you as belligerent going so close to Crimea, won't they?
They might take that view.
As HMS Defender comes within 12 miles of the coast, the Russian Coast Guard make a dangerous move. This Russian Coast Guard vessel has come up right close to this British warship and is trying now to force it to change course.
Nothing on the bridge. Absolute noise on the bridge.
If you cross the covered line, I'll be fire. If you don't change the course, I'll be fire. Will be over.
The crew don protective clothing in case snap threats follow through. Shots are fired, but they're well out of range.
Aircraft visual group 150, tracking right, altitude low.
Throughout the transit, HMS Defender detects at least 20 Russian military aircraft nearby. Some far too close for comfort. The Russian Defense Ministry released their own footage of their jets flying overhead, including imagery of what appears to be the British destroyer in their sights. Remember, this is not just about military brinkmanship, it's also about who can win the information war.
The UK and the Royal Navy, our deployment is here to maintain international order and uphold that for the global peace and security. And the Royal Navy and the UK will always call out states that do not follow international order. That's our mission.
Was it voting with them?
Confident, non-confrontational.
Last year, Russia claimed to have chased another Royal Navy warship
out of the Black Sea. But clearly, Britain's not been deterred. This is evidence that the UK is willing to challenge Russia to uphold international law. But it is a high-risk strategy. Jonathan Beale, BBC News, on board HMS Defender.
With me, watching the report, our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale. James, for everyone watching, wondering what potential there is here for a situation to get out of control, basically, what would you say?
Look, whenever you have more ships and more planes in close proximity, there is danger. And there is a risk of error, miscalculation, escalation. Incidents like this are not unprecedented, but I think today's was more acute than normal, and it was certainly more tense than normal. So, there is always risk. But I think you should also remember that both sides are pretty ready for this. Defender was at action stations. The Russians had lots of planes and ships in the region, and it was clearly a deliberate decision. Defender could have taken the greater southerly route away from Crimea. It chose not to assert its right to freedom of navigation in what the UK considers to be international waters. I'm told that's a decision, by the way, taken at the highest level of the British government. This was not a casual.
एम्बसीकडे हीच विनंती आहे की लवकरात लवकर आमच्यासाठी फ्लाईट्स अरेंज करून आम्हाला आमच्या देशी घेऊन जा. इथं आमच्या सिटीमध्ये सध्या खूप जास्त पॅनिकचं एन्व्हायरमेंट क्रिएट झालंय, कारण की इथं जे सुपर मार्केट्स आहेत ते सगळे
covering the situation in very tough conditions, of course, because the offensive operation is on. I'm not sure if you can hear now, but I can clearly hear the explosions. I am currently in Kyiv, and we can hear them during the day all the time, and the siren is going off. So that's the spirit. And for the allies, do toughen up the sanctions and do help more with weapons and the air defense systems.
But whether or not this extra and further support from the international community does come, we're learning that adult men between 18 and 60 years old who have had basic military training, well, they're being banned from leaving Ukraine. What more can you tell us about that?
Definitely, this is part of the martial law that was introduced yesterday morning in the very first hours and minutes of Russian invasion, in the very early hours of this war that Russia proclaimed for Ukraine. And the men really cannot leave the country nowadays. They're banned from doing so. They're invited to come and help defend their country, to protect the country, to protect their families, their wives, their mothers, their children. And I have to tell you that not so many men are leaving. So many across the country are signing up as volunteers to do so.
US President Joe Biden held a call with Ukraine's embattled leader on Friday. President Zelensky thanked the US for its sanctions against Russia and its continued defense assistance. Well, let's now cross over to Washington, D.C. and speak to Ray Suarez. Okay, so Ray, we heard that President Biden has spoken to President Zelensky. What more can you tell us about what they spoke about and the assurances that Biden gave?
President Zelensky has been very critical of the United States response over the last 72 hours. Not always the United States specifically, but the West in general, and pronounced Ukraine standing alone and asked for more assistance. It's at one point in a message to the EU dramatically said that this might be the last time that he was seen alive. So this is a significant change in tone to thank the U.S. for it. Also, important to keep those lines of communications open, as it seems to be, that this is going to be a fairly long crisis, not something that's wrapped up from one side or the other in just a day or 2 or 3 days. Right now, the United States continues to put men and materiel in the eastern regions of NATO and get ready for a large number of expected Ukrainian refugees coming west across Ukraine's borders. Mariam?
Now, we know that the US has now joined the EU in directly sanctioning President Putin and Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov. How effective do you think these sanctions are going to be?
Well, sanctions against individual Russians were part of the American design of its sanctions plan from the beginning, when they said they didn't want to hurt ordinary Russians with more broad-based measures, but target specific elites inside Russia. And of course, Sergei Lavrov and President Putin
Putin himself are the elites of the elites. Now, in the last 30 years, a lot of men have gotten extremely rich in Russia. But Russia hasn't been a great place to park that wealth, as we've seen with the cratering Russian stock market and the ruble at its lowest value historically. So they have tended to keep that wealth outside the country in pounds sterling, in euros, and in dollars. This leaves men like President Putin, rumored to be one of the richest men in the world, particularly vulnerable to the kinds of sanctions announced by both the EU and now matched by the Biden administration in Washington. Whether this is a pinch point, whether this is something that will, in the short term, really pressure the president remains to be seen. We've got a Russian leader now talking about Nazis and dope addicts in the capital in Kiev. It's hard to figure out exactly how rational or how self-interested he is at this point. Whether personal sanctions that go after his wealth and the enormous amount of money he's got squirreled away outside the country is really going to change anything in the short term. Marian?
Great analysis, as always, Ray Suarez in DC. Thank you so much. EU foreign ministers have met in Brussels to pass another raft of sanctions on Russia. Now, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine on Thursday, the bloc proposed punitive measures against Moscow. The sanctions target Russia's energy, financial and aviation industries. The EU's Foreign Affairs Minister, Joseph Borrell, said they have also approved the freezing of assets owned by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
As you know, in a sign of immediate support for Ukraine, we have adopted a sanctions package. It was agreed last night by the leaders of the member states. You know that the European Council provides political guidance in order for the Council of the Foreign Affairs Ministers of the European states approve formally and put that into actions. We have listed today President Putin and Foreign Minister Lavrov.
Now from Brussels, Shona Murray says there are questions being asked as to why the EU is not taking SWIFT, the international banking system, off.
There was a strong expectation, we spoke about it a couple of hours ago, that the SWIFT payment system would be on the sanctions list. There was hope that there was unanimity on that, requires unanimity. That wasn't able to happen this time around. Joseph Borrell said it's still on the table for perhaps a third round of sanctions, but it's very disappointing, I think, for many people who felt that this set of sanctions, although they are far-reaching and they're the largest set of sanctions that the EU has ever implemented, they seem to have fallen flat and they seem to have disappointed. We heard commentary from the likes of Donald Tusk, the former president of the European Council, who said the countries that were against you putting SWIFT on the set of sanctions, that they were at disgrace themselves.
So a little bit of disappointment there that SWIFT hasn't made the sanctions list. Now the EU, it's told Ukraine that it's not alone. We've seen, of course, these financial sanctions, but the Ukrainian President Zelensky says more help is needed. So how far do you think Brussels could go? Could SWIFT actually make it onto that sanctions list eventually, and when and why?
Yeah, I mean, unanimity is the problem here, because countries, Germany, Italy, Hungary, don't want to have it so far round. The question is, what does Putin have to do to get a third round of sanctions, to get the SWIFT financial transactions on the list? That's a huge goal. France is putting forward a resolution condemning Russia for the violence. Obviously, Russia will veto that, but it's hoped that the rest of the General Assembly will vote in favour of condemning Russia, because the EU, again, is not a military organisation. It's an organisation of 27 member states. The tools that they have is sanctions, and so that's really as far as it can go.
And NATO will send more troops to the borders of Eastern Europe. The plan was announced by the Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg following a special leaders' summit to discuss Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The move comes after Poland called for the alliance's forces in the east to be boosted. Together with Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, and Poland requested the emergency meeting to discuss Article 4, which covers the security of any parties of the alliance that is threatened. As Stoltenberg says, the alliance has already strengthened its defence.
We are deploying elements of the NATO response force on land, at sea, and in the air, to further strengthen our posture and to respond quickly to any contingency. The United States, Canada, and European allies have deployed thousands of more troops to the eastern part of the alliance. We have over 100 jets at high alert operating in over 30 different locations, and over 120 ships from the high north to the Mediterranean, including 3 strike carrier groups.
We're going to take a short break, but still to come on Euronews Now. We'll be heading over to Matthew in the queue.
Amid the attack on Ukraine and growing opposition online, Russia says it has partially restricted Facebook. We'll be taking a look after the break.
Because business is not only about acting fast, but doing the right thing at the right moment. Because no one can make the difference.
Stage a race in Russia under the current circumstances. And this year's Champions League final on May 28th will take place in Paris instead of the Russian city of St. Peter.
Thema SWIFT im vergangenen Herbst, das wurde dann aufgrund der bestehenden technischen Einwände dann auch wieder vom Tisch genommen.
Both Germany and Italy are highly dependent on Russian natural gas, and cutting Russia off SWIFT would also impact the finances of some European countries. Apart from Germany and Italy, Austrian and French banks also have a lot of businesses in Russia. Then there are countries like Hungary and the Czech Republic, the leaders of which have a friendly relationship with the Russian president. Joe Biden tried to justify the decision by stating that American sanctions are as consequential as kicking Russia out of SWIFT, but he ended up saying that the rest of Europe is in opposition to such a move for now.
You didn't mention SWIFT in your sanctions that you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. isn't doing that? Is there a disagreement among allies?
The sanctions that we are proposing on all the banks have an equal consequence, maybe more consequence than SWIFT, number one. Number two, it is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take.
The West has imposed hard-hitting sanctions against Russia as it continues with its invasion of Ukraine. The EU, the UK, US targeting Russian banks and oligarchs. On this topic, our principal diplomatic correspondent Siddharth Sibal spoke with the European Union's envoy to New Delhi. Take a listen in.
Sanctions have been announced, more sanctions are expected. Do you think that these sanctions will make any impact on Moscow? Moscow has done so in the past, Georgia, for example, Crimea, for example. This time, what is different when it comes to the voice coming from the European Union?
Well, I definitely believe that the sanctions will have a very severe impact. Will take a toll on Russian economy. Just yesterday, the European Council has come together and has elaborated a new package of sanctions. These are broader than the previous ones following the aggression now. These sanctions include economic and financial aspects. For instance, we are going to forbid access to very relevant technology, which is required for the modernization of Russian economy. We are going to block access to the European financial market.